So they gave me a little space over here in the basement. It's a bit of a dark corner, but it's quiet and it works really good. I think it used to be a dance studio or something. It's got a kind of cool floor. But the nice thing is that it doesn't have a lot of people in it very often, and it gives me the space that I need to do the kind of work that I'm doing, which involves a lot of movement when I'm doing my testing. So yeah, this is the space. It allows me to have my virtual reality setup. I can run my different cameras, and I have my different headsets in here, and then custom built computer to do VR work.
Okay, so you primarily study narrative in virtual reality. Can you introduce us to virtual reality? Just give us some context for that.
Yeah, so virtual reality is a technology. If you think about immersive media, which is what people are trying to accomplish with virtual reality, that's been around a lot longer. You can go back to cave paintings, all the way to epic poems, to panoramic paintings in the Victorian era. All of these were ways to immerse people in different kinds of media. What's really interesting about virtual reality, and the reason that I'm studying it, is that as a technology, it allows us to have a physical presence in a virtual space, and that's what makes it unique. And that presence is what I'm studying in relation to narrative. So the virtual reality setup that I'm using, I'm playing with two of the main commercially available headsets. So I'm using an HTC Vive, and I'm also using the Oculus Rift, which is the one that sort of kicked it all off in 2014. A big Facebook purchase. And it allows me to work in a virtual space, both in terms of creating, but also in order to tell a story. So it has, trackable controllers. You can move your hands. When you're in the space, it also tracks your position, so the headset gets tracked. And one of the things that I'm really interested in is that the audio, when you're in the space, because it's tracking your head, it also locates the sound as if the sounds are in real space, which is something I'm very interested in. So yeah, I'm using a game engine called Unity to build all my virtual spaces, and what it allows me to do is preview what I'm working on in real time. So basically I hit play on the game and grab the headset. Controllers, and then jump inside. So using the virtual reality headset, I'm able to go in and explore the virtual spaces that I build. And that allows me to test it out to see if it feels right, if it creates that sense of presence that I'm going for, that allows me to tell a story. And then if it feels correct, if I can move around it, if I can interact with the space in a way that makes you feel like you're there, then I can move on to the next step, and I can think about how those interactions work for storytelling. So right now I'm working on my thesis project. So it's my final project. It's called The Fort, and it's an imagination space. I'm working with this idea of space and place as a metaphor for a conversation. And it's a way for me to create almost like a virtual installation that people can go in and explore. And through exploring the space, being present in the space, it tells a story. So it's three-dimensional. I build it, like I said, in the Unity game engine. But really, that's just a tool that allows me to have a physical space and allows me to work in virtual reality. A lot of it's built using other technologies like 3D modeling and texturing and spatialized sound, working in sound programs to do spatialized audio. So that's what I'm currently working on, and be exhibiting that in June.
And what makes you passionate about this field, and what makes you passionate about, narrative and story in 3D and virtual spaces then?
Yeah, I mean, I've always been a storyteller, whether it's been through drawing, whether it's been through film. I did a lot of filmmaking towards the end of my bachelor's degree, and it's just sort of in the local Lethbridge community. I do a lot of filmmaking. So I've always been interested in telling a story. But I'm also really interested in technology, and I'm interested in the relationship between technology and narrative, the way that a medium affects the kinds of stories that you can tell, or the way that you can tell a story. There's this relationship between what you're telling the story in and the way that you can tell the story. And I'm really interested in that crossover point. And virtual reality is one of those interesting mediums that, even though the technology has been around since the 80s, we've only really been telling stories in it for the last 4 years. And it's very new. It doesn't have a really defined language yet. So it's kind of like cinema in the early days, you know, in the late 1800s, when they were first starting to use cinema cameras. They didn't know really what the language was for telling stories with it yet. And that's the point that we're at in VR right now. And so it's a really interesting space to work in because there aren't a lot of rules. And you can really kind of push in different directions and poke at the medium to figure out how to tell stories. It's not really a technical question so much as it is a design question. And that's the questions that I'm asking myself.
Does that kind of on an everyday sense still like excite you and get you passionate about your work?
Yeah, absolutely. It really does get me excited about my work to be working at something that's really in an early stage, a medium that's in an early stage. Because I sort of discover new things. It's like working in the web in the 90s, right? Where everybody was discovering these new things and everybody was pushing the technology. And there's a lot of commercial competition right now in virtual reality, but there's also a lot of people working in the artistic space that are pushing at the different boundaries of what VR can do. And there's a lot of expectation of what VR is going to be. And everybody's waiting for that to happen because we have this long history with it through like fiction, right? If you look at the writings of Neil Stephenson and William Gibson and Ready Player One and those sorts of things, people have this expectation of virtual reality. They want the holodeck, and it hasn't been delivered yet. But there's a lot of other cool things that are happening, and people are sort of pushing back against that expectation. And so it's like an exciting space to work in. So with this project, every day I get to think about, what is the space that I'm building, but more, why am I building it the way that I'm building it? And that's the biggest thing, is asking those why questions. Saying, if I'm doing this in virtual reality, if I'm putting a sound here, if I'm using this kind of interaction, why am I doing that? What am I trying to achieve? And for me, it's trying to create that connection between presence, being physically present in a virtual space, and being able to tell a story with that presence. So that's what I'm investigating.